you would look at me and think school worked really, really well for me. And it's taken me decades to understand the ways that it didn't work well, the ways that, because any child that is in school because they think there's no choice is having a very different experience than someone who is in school knowing that there are other choices. Children are losing the ability to learn where their edges are.
So you're asking something huge because of how things are working. Let's say
We don't know for sure that that will guarantee her success in life. Right? We don't know. So what we can be quite sure about is,
at what point should I say, like, have some discipline, and should I say she should learn some grit?
if we are confident that they can do it, then we can be confident that they will do it with anything when they need to.
Hello and welcome to Andy Share Parenting. Today, our guest is Stephanie Sewell, an alternative education consultant, speaker, and guide who helps families and educators around the world rethink traditional schooling and reclaim a more student-centered approach to learning. Stephanie's own background combines conventional teaching, homeschooling experience, and a deep commitment to making education more compassionate, individualized, and consent-based. She works with parents and teens to explore, co-create, or refine educational path that aligns with each person's needs, strengths, and rhythms, whether that means homeschooling, unschooling, hybrid models, or making school work in more flexible ways. Stephanie is also a speaker and workshop leader, and she has been featured on podcasts and media that explore education, learning, and how to design richer, more meaningful experience for children and teens. I'm so excited to have her here with us today. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much for making the time. I'm going to start with you. This is normally how I work with my guests because I love to hear stories. Can you tell me, Stephanie, what experience has shaped your path that you're on today?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing to reflect back on that when thinking about the present. So my answer to that question has evolved over the years as well. So my obvious answer to why I do what I do today is that I had the experience of choosing to homeschool my own children. And through that, I had to let go of a lot of my thoughts about what it was to be a good teacher and my learning. It started very conventionally. We sat around the table and I prepared everything for hours, and I quickly realized that that wasn't the optimal way that nurtured their sense of self and their best ability to learn. And over the few years that we did it with both of my kids, I also realized that it's not necessarily the same for each child. My son wound up homeschooling almost all of his his school years, and my daughter chose to go to school in grade 4, and that was her path. As my experience of homeschooling showed me how my most deeply held thoughts about education could be shifted, that got me very interested in it. And I started learning more about it. And I started to become the person that people would come to with questions. So that was that's one piece of why I'm doing what I'm doing today. Another key element is I founded and I continue to run a youth choir. So it's a children's choir for ages 6 to 12. Music is the other part of my background. And by being with the kids and co-creating this space with them that is a consent-based space, everything that I sense, when we're talking about homeschooling and education and sort of a learning education, I have a chance to explore that in choir and to see the difference that happens when you have a group of children who are together under this kind of model, this way of being. It's beautiful. And it has been so for 16 years. For many, many kids, I've watched them come through it and have positive experiences. And then the most recent answer to how my experiences have shaped the path I'm on today is my own school experiences. So I used to be a bit puzzled about why I was interested in alternative education because I was a great student. I did really, really well, went to university. You would look at me and think school worked really, really well for me. And it's taken me decades to understand the ways that it didn't work well, the ways that I was my true sense of being and how I am, and the gifts that I bring to this world were smothered in a school context. That's become really intriguing for me as a concept. So most of the families I work with, it's obvious that things are not going well for their child in school or in their conventional homeschooling setting. But I'm very curious, and I'm wanting to reach more and more out to people who look like they are doing really well, and just to make sure that they actually are.
Wow. I resonate so much with the last part, the most recent answer, because I was the good student and I was like the teachers loved me. My friends loved me. I was being praised so much for being good, getting good grades. And now I realize that I did that because that felt good, not the, actual what I was studying. And I ended up somewhere that I like to be. Like I'm here. As you said, school worked, especially I'm an immigrant. I come from a poor family. If I didn't study, I wouldn't get free education. I had free education available to me in Iran. So like that's a different situation. But at the same time, to be honest, I feel if I go back, I could study half of that and still be here. Maybe, I don't know. I question that all the time. And then the conflict that I would get with my daughter. She was raised in I don't know what I should call it. Like we are one of those families that give a lot of autonomy to our kids, and she couldn't tolerate public school. She was like, and even yesterday we were talking about, Mom, why I didn't like public school? I'm like, you know what? You were just four and you couldn't explain exactly what was happening. I had some guesses, but I could explain. Like I told her that I can't. I had some guesses, but you were not able. She would come to our home and she from school, and she would be like, "Mom, I don't want to go." And I'm like, "What's happening? Can you explain?" She's like, "No." And it's like, it's hard. She doesn't know what's going on, that she's having a hard time. But as someone who has experienced the extreme, uh, I had some ideas, and it's very interesting when you see to be my true self. And like, I realized that this is what my understanding. I wasn't that. I felt the same thing, but at the same time, I don't know what was the alternative if I'm happy with where I am right now. So I'm not going to think about myself and the past. I'm going to think about my next generation and try my best to make that better.
Well, and I think that, me looking back on my experience and saying, perhaps my true sense of self, was a bit smothered and all of that. The follow on from that is not, I wish I hadn't been at school. But the follow on from that is that it's really important that when we're thinking about school and how the role that school is playing in an individual child's life and how we set up our schools, like, what is a good school? It's really important that we see what's actually happening with the kids that appear to be successful in school. Because the ones, I had a conversation one time with a bunch of colleagues who were all in alternative education in some way. And I think we were maybe 20 and maybe 18 had all been the disruptive kid, the bad kid. They hated school. They were dropouts, like all these words. That was them. And that's what brought them into looking at education as adults. There were two of us who had the experience of being good at school. And it was a fascinating conversation that ensued. And that was one of my moments of like, well, why is it different? So I think it's just important that voice, that perspective is held alongside how do we make people stop dropping out? If we're going to look at something, we want to be making sure that we're looking at the whole picture. And so the experience you're sharing is important, because had it been different, obviously you never know, moments in your life cause whatever, it doesn't matter, but it's worth holding on to that.
Yes, totally. That was a very beautiful follow-up. I love that. I love to think about it from that view. Amazing. Stephanie, okay, tell me, now you're here. What is your mission in life?
So for me, I think what it all boils down to is to create settings and contexts where kids are truly seen, where they can truly grow as themselves in the context they live in their society, and be able to be their most beautiful, authentic selves. So in trying to do that and trying to bring that forward, I'm really wanting to sort of deepen the narrative and make the narrative more visible about why school doesn't necessarily work for everyone, and that that's okay. What are the alternatives? That we can stop using words like dropout. We can stop saying failing. That we can. I really want to just start bringing attention to this notion that in a society that wants to create space for everybody to bring their best self forward, we really need to be looking at school and the assumption we have that everybody is best served by going to school, and that if they don't, it's a disaster. So that we can create an honest space and honest choice. Because any child that is in school because they think there's no choice is having a very different experience than someone who is in school knowing that there are other choices. They can be sitting in the same classroom, can be the same child, but how they engage with their day is completely different if they know they can leave or they think they can't leave. And it's amazing how many clients I have whose the first thing they say is, it was because I couldn't leave. That's why school was so hard for me. Because I would feel like I would start feeling anxious, or I wouldn't be feeling well. But in order to be able to leave, I had to put my hand up and draw attention to myself. And I had to convince the teacher to let me go. There's things like that around I couldn't leave that is sometimes a huge factor. So it's just this notion of being able to choose to be there allows us to experience all the good. Just because somebody knows they can leave doesn't mean they will.
Yeah.
It just means they can feel safe being there.
You're going to make me cry. Because I'm like, even now I'm going to therapy to learn the same thing. I was like, this is some practice that I had with my therapist, that learning what I really want to do. And interestingly, in those practices, I actually did like some parts of it. I did chores, and I realized that I wanted to do chores. It was not that I hate chores. So that's like, yeah, maybe if they have a choice, they still choose that. But it's very like, now if I do the chores is very different than before I knew I actually chose to do that.
It's massive. And, I mean, it's easy to sort of listen to this and think, well, yeah, but, you don't always have a choice. You do have to just do the chores. But when you understand the difference, when you have that concept of I can choose to do something that I might not enjoy doing or that might be hard, but I choose to do it anyway. Like when that's part of your psyche and your way of being, it's much easier to just go and do the things that you want to do because you can see them through that lens. I'm buying a new car and I have to go to the outlet to get the license done. Like I hate doing that stuff. But I just know that I have to do it, and I'm okay with it because I understand why I have to do it. Whereas if somebody was randomly making me do it because it was good for me to learn how to do it, then it would feel very different. So I think we can trust that children can understand when something is necessary. We're not used to trusting that. It's something exactly not like, oh yeah, just suddenly it'll all be fine. But it is there as a reality, I believe. That's in my experience.
When you were talking about kids' consent, I almost cried because it reminded me of some short video that I saw a few days ago. They were all kids around 5, 6, that they were all crying. It was mostly boys that were crying. And then parents were actually pulling them to the classroom. The comments broke my heart that people found that funny while I was like, my tears were coming down and people found that funny. It's like, we have accepted as a society that this is a must. It has to happen. And kids are being dramatic about it. And obviously it was not all the kids. It broke my heart. It was very hard to see that scene, and it was very hard to read the comments. And I wish, these conversations could at least change those comments.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's often that filter that we look at things through. And I suspect we're going to dive into this further as we carry on our conversation. But yeah, I think there's lots of ways that we can invoke the practice of starting to see things differently, of seeing our interactions with our own children and other children differently.
Yeah. You mentioned something else, Stephanie. You said that you want those kids who are at some point, you said the kids that don't fit in and normally they drop out, or to know they have a choice. But before that, you also mentioned from your own experience that you also want to find those kids that are good, not because they like the school, because they, for example, they're enjoying the all the comments that they get and they're pleasing other people like parents or society or teachers. But it brought a question to my mind. Do you think like traditional school is suitable for anybody? Is this way working for anyone, at least at a young age? That, in my opinion, kids are supposed to learn from. I learned this from Peter Gray. There's a different way that at that age kids learn, even after that, mostly through play and just following the adults or looking at them. Do you think traditional school is good for anybody?
It's a really big question, and I'm not going to answer it directly because it has to me, it has to do with your context. So if you think about why schools were started in the first place here in North America, and I'm sure it will be a very different story in Iran. But, settlers were living on their farms and everybody was far away from each other. And, and the school wound up being a center of the community. It happened a couple of months a year. It was a way for the kids to learn some basic skills. There was sense to it, right? Like you can easily look at that and see the validity, the beauty of it. Our schools have their root in some of that. There's lots of places that our schools have their roots. But I think what's happened is school has become all encompassing. So the things that are good about school that you could argue serve most children well, like the chance to come together with other children, the chance to explore and learn how to be in their community, right? Like a village school in Iqaluit, what those children need to learn about living and engaging is completely different than a city school in Paris. I don't know. So the idea that the children come together in something that is reflective of their community and they spend time together learning, and that makes sense. But when we get to the point of okay, well, all children must go. It must be 10 months a year. It must be for 11, 12, 13 years. We are going to grade them on what they're doing there. That's when it starts to get tricky. So that's kind of my non-answer to your question.
I loved your answer because now I can see it, because I see that we have different, like my friends, we have different experiences with public school, because each school is like, they act very different when it comes to community. And I remember one of the problems that my daughter had was she was never placed close to the friends that she loved to spend time with. She was always put the farthest from them. Right after school, she was like, can I have a play date with her? I'm like, you were 6 hours, 7 hours at school. And then I realized she didn't have time at all, other than like very few recess time. But my friend has a very different experience. Same city, another location in Toronto. And they have a very strong community, both at a school, and they have a club also, like a community club. They're always a community, and school has done that for them. And it came to my mind why she didn't like school, why it didn't work for us. And now I realize it's the community aspect of it. Everybody would enjoy that aspect of it. There are different aspects. And to be honest, if that aspect is working really good, maybe it's worth the other, and we can make the other parts be more flexible with it. That was a very interesting answer. Thank you so much.
And it is that. It's like and even within that, right? Some kids might not want to go to a school every day, even if it's beautifully integrated into their community. They might want to spend their time playing piano, and school just gets in the way. So it's this notion of being open and flexible and noticing what the role of school is in the child's life, in the family's life, in the community's life. homework is a really big part of it as well. Like if you have a child who needs to go to school and then comes home after spending time in aftercare because the parent isn't able to get there right at the end of the school day, and then the family arrives home and they're trying to make dinner and get homework done and get to bed, that's a really stressful evening, or stressful, like it's a very intense evening. So for a child who's already had an intense school day followed by an intense evening, that might all be too much. But if their day is what it is, and then the evening isn't filled with homework, or it isn't filled with must-dos, maybe there's a grandparent living there happily who's got dinner ready to go, like, whatever it is, that evening is a kind of the contrast to the school day, the school experience might be totally fine. So, that gets back to, well, what are some of the ways that parents might possibly be able to help their child have a positive school experience? That's like looking at what life is like outside of school is a big piece for that as well.
That's amazing. That's very, a hope, like it's because many parents have to send their kids to public school. So it's really good to know that we can still, manage like an easier education path for them, even if they go to a traditional school. Thank you for we are going to get deeper into that too. But right now I want to ask about, okay, so in school, we have the standard in math, literature, every subject that at each age, each child needs to learn something. I'm going to put that aside and ask you, what should I care if I don't think about traditional school, that my kids learn in life through their education so they can thrive in this setting of North America in the future?
I think that one of the most important things for kids to learn is to trust themselves. To trust themselves with other people, to trust themselves in knowing what it is they need to learn, to trust that they can learn. And by trusting themselves, they understand what it is to be in a positive situation with other people. And this will serve them really well for their whole life. It will serve them into higher education settings, into work settings, to trust that they can learn something if and when they need to learn it.
How can I make that happen?
It starts when they're babies. It starts when they're first born. When you respond to a baby's cry in a way that trusts that that baby is communicating something to you, that baby learns to trust itself. When a baby is showing that it's too tightly wrapped and it's trying to get out and you unwrap it. When a baby is trying to roll over and you're there supporting the baby, helping the baby, celebrating the baby, loving the baby, creating that space for it to happen safely. That's the trust. And there's an opposite to that, which, thinking of the baby rolling over, if you see your baby trying to roll over and you go and roll them over every time, they lose that trust in themselves. And that's part of what happens as we start sending children into school settings. They start to lose that trust in themselves because we're telling them how to learn to spell. We're evaluating them on their reading. We're making them do things in a certain way. So their trust and their ability to trust themselves and their process, which was probably intact for quite a while, because most of us don't pull our baby over. When they're trying to stand and walk and talk, we're just there supporting, celebrating, and witnessing. And that shifts as they start getting into the things that we think they need to be taught, like reading and writing, counting. So that trust gets shifted.
What stops us to trust? The anxiety. Where does the anxiety come from? How can I fix that anxiety?
That comes back to trust again. And I think it's the trust that we have in our children. And it's true that we want nothing more than to protect them and to keep them safe. And the more we can realize that sometimes keeping them safe actually makes them less safe. Because if a child is always rolled over, the baby is always rolled over, they don't know how to roll themselves over. And if they need to roll over, they might not be able to do it. So, and that's as parents, we never ever get away from this question, right? Like how much, if your child is about to run out into the road, you grab them or not. Obviously, you grab them. But the more, it's like with climbing trees. It's like the stories we tell, right? When I was young, I used to go and my mom would tell me to come home before dark. And when that was happening, in whatever version it was happening in your life, kids were climbing trees. They would go and climb up to the top of a tree. And most of them never fell out. And if they got up to the top and they were scared to get down, they figured it out. Eventually, maybe their friends figured it out with them. They learned. So next time they were in a situation where they needed that muscular set of skills or that confidence in themselves, that trust, or that knowledge that you can get into a sticky situation and get through it, the next time they were in that kind of situation, they had already learned to trust. They knew that they were going to be able to figure it out. Whereas as we stop children from climbing trees, as we make our playgrounds safer and safer, children are losing the ability to learn where their edges are, to learn what it is to slip and grab yourself. And we, as human beings, we need those skills. So we've gone perhaps we were a long way in one direction with go play in the forest and field and I'll see you at dark. Now we've gone way back in the other direction. And there's a great program in the States that Peter Gray is involved with called Let It Grow. Wait, I'm suddenly second guessing myself on the name. But it is that idea of reintroducing activities, challenges, whatever, practices that are dangerous and helping parents to find the way to be confident with it.
Oh my God, this example was great. As a kid, I was always fighting with my mom to give me more freedom. And now I'm like, how could she let me go without a phone? How could she manage that? Things are different too. Neighborhoods people used to know each other more. All the shops on that street, for example, knew that I'm that family's, daughter. So each neighborhood was more like a village. So it was more safe, in my opinion. Maybe that's why if somebody would find me, they knew where to take me if I'm lost. So it's a little bit different. That's why we need phones. Even in that, you were saying about climbing trees. We went camping last weekend and our kids were going up a hill and it was really, really steep. And then I was like, you know what? The solution is not to look that way. Just look the other way and let them do it. And I did that. It was hard.
Well, it's, my kids are 20 and 23 now. And I remember somebody telling me that her kids are 3 years older than mine. And I remember her saying, it gets so much easier when they move out because you don't know what they're doing. And at the time, this was 5-10 years ago, whatever. And I thought, that's impossible. I'm just going to be worried the entire time. But it's true. I don't know they're out doing whatever. So I can't worry about it. And that means that I get to just hear their stories afterwards. And they're obviously, they're adults now, they're developing those adult skills. So, the corollary of that for when they're younger is, sometimes it's okay to look away because it's really hard to watch and they feel it. If you're watching, you're they know it and that affects their ability to be safe. If they feel your lack of trust, they will be less safe, guaranteed.
I realized even if I act, for example, I learned in theory that I should not be anxious about this, but then genuinely I am, and I act differently. It doesn't work.
And there are we have to give ourselves grace as well, right? There's any conversation like this is by default philosophical, right? If you were consulting with me for a specific situation with your child, it would be looking at the application of all of this much more. But so, the notion of do you turn your back on your child on the steep slope? It's a philosophical question, but it's a really good one to be aware of. right? Because if you could ask yourself that question, like, is this a turning my back moment? It might be like, you know what? I know that my daughter didn't eat this morning, and not eating makes her a bit dizzy. And that's actually a really steep slope with some rocks on it. I'm actually just going to keep an eye this time. So but you're bringing your awareness to it. You can drive yourself crazy by constantly asking yourself the questions. But yeah, I think it's that awareness of the importance of them having that space. And just to go back, because you were, sorry if I can, just because you were saying, the neighborhood you grew up in was smaller, people knew you, and that's true. Our worlds have changed, and it doesn't. I think it doesn't still necessarily mean that they need a phone or that they need. It's just that they're going to be developing different skills. Like a kid who's in a larger city where nobody in the neighborhood knows anybody, you might still want them to develop the skills to be safe in that context, but they're different skills than if you're in a small neighborhood where everybody knows everybody. And I also think it's far more difficult for parents now because we have the option to give them phones and be able to see where they are. So again, my kids are of the age, we were quite late as cell phone adopters. So I feel like I mostly avoided having to really think about that by like a year. And I'm really glad. But at one point, our daughter did have an app on her phone, like a tracking app that we could see her. And closing that down when we had agreed to stop it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Because I was like, why would I stop myself from being able to see where she is? I won't be able to keep her safe. One time to close it down. And that's the challenge of the times that we're in now, because we have this potential to constantly know where they are, control this, control that. And to say thanks, but no thanks, I will let my child have the autonomy, the actual autonomy to check. Like, that's hard. And, because everybody has phones, there are no pay phones anymore. So if you don't give your child a phone, they can't just find a phone box. Like it's very, 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 very complex, which is why I'm emphasizing this is a philosophical concept.
No, but I get the point. Yeah. No, okay. Let's go back to something that's easier. This is too hard. I might still get an air tag. Okay. I'm gonna work on that part of me, that anxiety. I feel this is getting too hard for me. I have like small children, so I have some time to get to that point. I might still get an air tag, but phone, I agree. For other also reasons, I don't like the phone, especially the social media part. But this was very interesting because it actually pushed my boundaries a little bit, this conversation, and I like that. And I want to think about it. Let's go back to the trust for the education part. So you're asking something huge because of how things are working. Let's say my kid is going to public school with other kids, and everybody is learning certain amount of things at certain amount of time. Half of the kids are learning it. My kid is not learning it. She's not good at it. How can I trust her that it's okay? The fact that my kid is going to alternative school and I'm already there. She is behind people, like kids in public school. And I'm not nervous about it at all because this is the pattern. Because she always had autonomy. This is the pattern that she learns something. Everybody's learning something. She doesn't like it. She doesn't learn. There are core stuff that they have to learn, but there's no timeline for it. She doesn't do it. She does it in 2 weeks, something that she was supposed to do like in 1 year. I don't know, like in 6 months. And then she stops at certain point. She doesn't finish it. For example, she was interested to learn Persian writing and reading. And like, she didn't go to any classes, nothing. And at one night she was like, I want to read this book. How can you help me? And we mapped the letters in Farsi and in English. And for 2 nights, she studied up to like 10 letters. And that was it. She stopped. And maybe in 2 years, she's going to forget the 10 letters and start from scratch and learn like 15 letters, or she might not. I don't know. I'm comfortable with that, but I don't know until what age. I don't know if she gets to 12 and she hasn't learned, like she's behind in math, like 3 years, 4 years behind that standard. How can I keep my calm and anxiety from, oh my God, my daughter is not going to be successful. America and Canada they are both very competitive countries. If she doesn't get to that point, I want her to be able to financially manage herself. Like, this is important for her well-being. Everything comes to in the background of my mind. How can I be sure about that?
So we can never obviously be sure about anything either way, right? So even if she's excelling in everything in school, we don't know for sure that that will guarantee her success in life. Right? We don't know. So what we can be quite sure about is how she is, how kids, I'll start speaking more generally now, so we don't like take your daughter right through all of this, but how kids are in themselves and in learning. That's what we want to be focused on. So I'm going to come back to your daughter. So in this context, the way you're relating it is really interesting because she's seeing everybody doing something, she won't do it. And then at a certain point, she says, okay, now I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to finish it all the way. So this autonomy piece sounds really strong for her. And because she's in an environment right now where she's able to be autonomous, she's getting to have multiple experiences of deciding how she's going to do it, right? So she's like watching them. At a certain point, she's like, okay, I'm going to do it now. So that decision, that's big for her, right? Like if she started saying like, they learned that I'm never going to do it. In my whole life, I'm never going to do it. Like, that's one way that decision could go. She might say, I'm going to wait a day, or like, I'm going to wait 2 days. Every time she does that, she's practicing how she wants to react when other people are learning something that she is supposed to learn or wants to learn. And then her decision to learn it really quickly, but maybe not all the way. Again, she's practicing these different things. So she's got the space to see what happens and they're experiments. They really are. Like, oh, I did it this way and this happened this way, this happened. At a certain point, she might be done experimenting and just do it with everybody else. We don't know, but the fact that she's got that opportunity to try and that she's taking ownership for it is indicative of this kind of internal health, which hopefully will continue to serve her really well. If she was in a different setting, or for a child who's in a school setting where, they're being failed because they're not, they're so many grades behind and they're now the tallest kid in the class, or they're getting bad marks and they're getting, IEPs that they don't want to have because IEPs, like individualized education plans, for some kids are amazing and like now finally things work. For other kids, they really don't want that because they feel like it separates them from the other kids in the class. So for whatever's going on, if that child who's behind, if that's becoming a real problem, the problem is they're behind in that context. So and it legitimately can be a problem because we don't want them to be 10 years old in grade 1 or, whatever it is. So then we do need to look at it. We need to figure out what's going on. And it might be that, that child's family does look at a different school setting for a little while. It might be that some kind of tutoring helps that child. But the most important thing is to try to get to the bottom of where the consent is. What's the child's experience? Or is the child, like maybe the child really doesn't like that teacher and that's the issue. Maybe the child missed some key concepts and they are telling themselves a story that they can't do anything in math because they didn't get that. So the more we can take the time to step aside from like, you've got to learn this and just engage and see what's going on, that's probably where the answer is going to be.
Interesting. Basically, this problem could have many solutions and it all depends on why that's happening.
Yeah, the more we, as the experts, as the adults, try to impose problems, it might work. Like we might happen to find some wonderful tutor and the kid loves this person and it might actually be that relationship with the tutor that allows things to move forward. So we can keep throwing solutions at it as maybe something will work. At the same time, if we can try to really figure out what's actually going on for the child, we'll be more equipped to find a solution.
And then what I hear from you is to be open with no commitment to that solution, because we are like, if it sometimes might be hard to figure out what's the root of this problem. So I guess I tried this solution. If after trying it, there is no consent, we can change it to the next solution and figure out which one will work. That was very, I really like that, because I always believe that our kids, especially age before 12, or even after 12, like they don't have enough experience to be able to commit to something. Once they have the experience, they realize that, oh, this is something that I want to pursue, or this is something that I don't want to pursue. So give them some time to explore that solution and then be flexible with the solutions that we offer.
Yes. And if you're asking a child to try a solution that they don't want to try, then be wary of how you engage with that. So, it's easy for us to think, well, they don't have the life experience yet. Like we think this is going to be good for them and we should make them do it. And sometimes we should. Absolutely. There's nothing, like, I'm not saying that's always wrong, but if we're setting out on a path where the child is going to have resistance to it, then you have to set out very carefully on that path. So if you can try to find a way to try that solution, like, sometimes it's around what is the commitment term. So like if you want a child to try tutoring, to use that example again, how many sessions will you ask of the child so that the child knows, if I consent, I will get to withdraw my consent if I want after 3 sessions or whatever. Is it that the child, I remember I used to tutor this girl whose mom owned a bakery, and we always had really amazing treats, and I'm sure that probably made it a little bit easier for her to spend that time after school on math. So what is it that can make it easier?
Okay, interesting. You are pushing so many stuff that were like lines for me. Like I'm pushing those boundaries because I'm so advocate for like autonomy. And I'm like, oh, we can make this work. We can make that work. Like there are so many paths that we can make it work. It's not just one way. I truly believe that there is not just one way, but I'm more inclined to that, autonomous approach for kids. And then when it comes to that part, there's a line between, okay, so where the grit comes, like right now, my daughter she's trying something, as you said, exploring the different ways of learning. She did the same thing with swimming. She did the same thing with skates. She's just exploring stuff. At what point should I say, like, have some discipline? And should I say she should learn some grit? She should have a goal and she should have a hard time. Like she's not supposed to enjoy as we talked about it, like making a choice. And the choice is, I'm not going to have fun. Is there age for it? Should I trust that she's going to do that in the future by herself? If she doesn't do it until, for example, 14, would she be able to still do it if she always did whatever she liked in terms of education? I mean, these are other anxieties that can happen.
Yes, we can learn that at any age. And even before thinking like that, I'm going to take us back to that baby that's learning to walk. So if we want to think about doing something that's hard, grit, patience, think about a human being that's learning to walk. How many times will that child fall down and hit themselves? Maybe even their head, like it hurts to fall down. The frustration of trying to stand up and almost and then you can't. Everybody around you is already doing it. And you can't. If ever there was an example of grit, determination, doing something even though it's hard, even though it hurts, even though it takes time, humans learning to stand and walk. There we go. So our children, have done that at that age. And we can trust that if they've done it at that age, they're definitely able to do it later. If we start feeling like they can't do it, then the question to ask is, why? If you can think back to when they rolled over or they sat up, and examples of when they were determined, learning to talk is another one, right? Imagine at first, like you're trying to say stuff and nobody understands you. Like that's super frustrating, but we push through. So if they have had moments in their past where they've been able to do that and now they can't, or you're afraid they can't, what's changed? And often what's changed is that we've stepped in and started rolling them over, right? We've said, You don't have to figure out how to read. We're going to teach you. This is how to do it. We're going to show you, we're going to break it down. And if you think about the learning to walk equivalent of how we teach reading, it would be like, okay, today we're going to start learning to walk. I'm going to put your foot on the floor so you can feel that. Now let's do that 10 times, whatever. It's ridiculous, right? And, as a thought experiment, we can look at reading or writing through the same lens, and we can easily see that's ridiculous, except it's really hard to see that it's ridiculous because it's so far away from what we've all. Children do learn to read in the same quick, not being taught way as they learn to walk when they're allowed the space to do so. Like that, if you look in the unschooling world, a lot of children do learn to read quite spontaneously like that.
Exactly. It's like their brains click at some point. Before that, they're taking their time. It's very difficult. At some point, they just start reading fluently.
So if we think about what's going on, the before that was when they were noticing. It's like, the baby's noticing that everybody's walking and they're crawling. Like it's that awareness that there is a thing that you can like see these letters and like, oh, there's pictures in that book, but there's also these funny black lines. Oh, and they mean something. Like it takes time to notice. And then, whatever's going on, like everybody's different, right? But at a certain point, you start making some sense of it. Like I remember my husband and I went to live in Poland for a year before I learned how to speak Polish. And so I remember like I would take the bus to work, and at first, like I'd see all the shop windows, like all the writing, and I didn't know anything. Like I'd hear people talk. It completely overwhelmed, nothing. But then gradually, like I could start to hear blah, 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 and hear words. I wouldn't know what they meant yet, but I was like, I think that's a word. That's a word. And then, gradually, like I'd see on the store windows, I'd be like, oh, I know kind of that word. It would be a declension of some kind, but like, oh, that's a shoe shop. And so all of that was happening. But if somebody had sat down and tried to force me to learn it in a predetermined curriculum, that it might not have worked. It might have worked, but it might not have worked as easily. At a certain point, I decided I wanted to learn to speak Polish. So I signed up for a class. And then that class made sense for me. I put myself into a situation of learning and being taught because I wanted to. I was ready. So it's that same kind of thing with learning, with grit and in a learning context for children. If we are confident that they can do it, then we can be confident that they will do it with anything when they need to. And an example of that is my son, who homeschooled, with the exception of grade 7. He went to a Montessori school just to experience school. Other than that, he homeschooled until grade 12. And by the time he was like grade 9, grade 10 age, he knew that he wanted to go to university, probably for engineering. And so he could see, like, if that's the goal, there's things I need to have in place to do that. Like, I need to learn the math that I'm going to need. And one of the examples was he wanted to learn how to write tests because he's never written tests. So we found a friend who teaches in a school and had access to tests for grade 11, something or other, I can't remember. And so my son prepared himself, and then we get the test, and he'd like sit down with the timer and write the test, and then he would get it marked. And so it sounds crazy to think that a teenager would choose to write a test. But he did, even though it was hard, and because he knew where he wanted to go, and he trusted himself and his ability to create the process that he needed, and that I was there to support him.
Stephanie, you coming, because I have the same background, coming from some like traditional school and being successful in it, and like getting to some point that like could be the definition of success from public school, traditional school. Did you have this trust and like from day one, or did you have anxieties like me too?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I could say that I had the trust. I think I learned it. And I learned it because when my son was, 6, 7 years old and we were starting our homeschooling journey, as I said, I started quite conventionally. And there was actually an interesting situation. So he, talking about, sorry, this is a bit of an aside, but I think it's relevant. We had started, I was quite like unschooly, but also very influenced by Waldorf. So I wasn't like focused on him learning to read and write early at all. But my husband is Polish and they have these Saturday morning language schools close to where we are in Ottawa. So Oliver was going to Saturday morning Polish school, and the kindergarten program was already quite kind of conventionally academically oriented. They were learning letters. And I was sort of watching him through this thinking, okay, so he's the homeschooled kid who doesn't know letters yet because of how we do this at home. And the other kids are all in conventional schools. So they're learning their letters. And so at some point in his kindergarten grade 1 year, I realized because he's in that context on Saturday mornings, there's logic and a value to him learning letters and some basic words so that he can participate in that context. So even though had he not been in that context, we wouldn't have done that, it made sense in that context. And he could see as well, like, they were using basic reading stuff. So that's an example of how you assess your context always, right? But yeah, so the idea of the trust, that definitely developed gradually for me as I did research, as I saw what it was with my kids, and a big part of it as well, like where we live just outside the city. So my kids both spent a lot of time outside, and my son in particular is an avid mountain biker now. And he loved, like from a very young age, he was already trying to figure out how to build trails and build dumps. And so I could see that when he had the space, that was what he did. And it was easy for me to look at that and understand that he was learning about soil erosion, about like the physics of a ramp. Like it was easy to see that he was learning all this stuff that I could describe in very academic terms, but he was doing it just because he wanted to build a trail and a mountain bike ramp. And that's a key concept for any of this kind of trusting our kids. So I was lucky that my son showed me that very clearly, very young. And my daughter's a horseback rider. It was the same thing. Like there was so much that she was learning just because she wanted to be with horses that I could say, like, I can see that she's learning, like hair and animal anatomy, and she's memorizing it because it matters to her. So it wasn't such a far stretch to start saying, okay, I can trust that they will learn other things because it matters to them. But yeah, I learned that through experience for sure.
That's the point, like learning something because it matters to them. And they like when they finish, there might be stuff that they never studied that people are forced to study in public school. And you're comfortable with that. That's also important.
Yeah, because I know that they can, if they want to learn something, they'll just go learn it. And if you think about it, like even if you do really well in school, like how much of your grade 10 and 11 physics do you remember?
Remember the day after the test, the subject that I didn't like, if you asked me one question after the test, I had learned the game of tests so well. I could do really well in the test. One day after, I wouldn't know it. But the stuff that I enjoyed, that they are different.
So that's an important filter to remember to look through as well, an important lens, because if we assume everybody who goes to conventional school and does all these subjects learns all this stuff, if we think that that's true, then and we're kind of judging unconventionally educated learning people against that perception, it's an unfair comparison or it's not a useful comparison, because most people in school will easily acknowledge that they don't retain a big part of what they have supposedly learned in that context. So if you compare apples to apples and think, okay, what do you retain of what you care about, or what's the total amount of stuff that you've learned that you retain, the comparison would look very different. And I would venture to say that somebody who's been in a non-fully conventional education context probably learns and retains more.
Totally agree. We have talked about a lot of philosophy, and as you said, the application is going to be different. Can you explain about like your role as an educational consultant? People can reach out to you for what kind of problems?
For sure. So people reach out to me when things are not working. So sometimes it's families that have been homeschooling for a while and suddenly it's just not working. Most often it's families where their children are starting to refuse to go to school and they're trying to figure out what to do. What generally happens in a school type of setting is that all of the wonderful professionals in that setting who care very much for the children, they themselves aren't aware of this kind of world outside of school, conventional school. So their efforts are helping the children go back to school, which sometimes does work, but often doesn't work. And so my client base is usually kids and families for whom that's not happening. And they're trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like? If we suddenly have to homeschool, what does that even mean? How do we do this? Many of my clients come from Quebec or other provinces or states where they are obliged to report on their homeschooling. How do you do that if your child is largely a self-directed learner and refusing math right now? So I'm helping the parents to understand and strategize and navigate this process that's happening. And I also work with teens in particular as a mentor, so that as a teen is stepping outside of their school experience, they come for sessions with me every week that are it really varies according to each teen. It's often around kind of debriefing about the school experience. Let's talk about school and how it's set up and how would you set it up differently and what was hard and what was the history of school. And so it's some of that, but it also becomes what's going on in the world. So what do you think about this situation? And interestingly, those conversations then start to become some of the learning that teen has. So it's all beautifully mixed in together. So I basically walk alongside families as a supporter when they're needing to reinvent education.
That's amazing. I'm going to leave you the information of your homepage here under the description of this episode. So anybody with different kinds of problems, because I know it might get really hard, they can reach out to you. I have one last question though before we end. I want to know if you have are you fond of any, like there are so many alternative education coming out. Is there any type that you're really fond of it or like you really like the philosophy of them?
My favorite one is the one that works for your child and your context. And I know it is an answer, but it's also kind of not an answer. And I say it, and it's really important because if you fall in love with Waldorf education and you spend hours researching it, and this is the way, and there's no Waldorf school within 2 hours of your house, you might absolutely fall in love with an academy and your child goes for a day and they hate it because whatever, they don't like the color on the walls. I don't know, like something that has nothing to do with Acton Academy. Or they love it. Like, right, it's like, you never know.
No.
So when you're looking at an alternative to the conventional setting that you have available to you, the most important thing is to come back to your child, your family, the reality. Do your research in terms of what is available. Do you have grandparents who are involved, who are happy to have a grandparent day once a week? Do you have, my son used to go for sculpting lessons to our neighbor for a little while. Like, do you have other children that need to be looked after? Like, what's the situation? And that's what I help parents talk through as well. Like, what's available? Are there homeschool clubs? Is there Acton? Is there Montessori? Is there Waldorf? Is there whatever? And then what do we try? What kind of a pattern, a weekly pattern do we start with? And then how do we adjust it as needed?
That was an amazing response. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you for this conversation. And thank you for what you're doing.
You're welcome. It's my honor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Andisha Parenting. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and share it with someone who might benefit. And if you have a powerful story or experience that could help other parents or children, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me a message on social media or contact me through the email I share in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself and your little ones.